In the Balkans, the royal dynasties have made a return. Previously ousted by the communists, they are now held in high esteem. In Romania, Crown Princess Margareta and her husband Prince Radu are playing an important role. In Montenegro, the monarchy was abolished almost 100 years ago, but to this day, the Montenegrins remain proud of their former realm. The head of the Petrović-Njegoš family is Crown Prince Nicola II. In Bulgaria, King Simeon II has lived in Varana Castle since the year 2000. He's called upon to use his diplomatic talents and receives aristocratic as well as civilian visitors. His second cousins, Princess Margareta of Romania and Prince Nicola II of Montenegro, are also regular guests. Crown Princess Margareta from the House of Hohenzollern has presided over the Romanian royal family since 2014. Alongside her other activities, she supports charitable projects through her foundation.
Bon, ça implique d'être au service de ma nation. Ça implique beaucoup de travail et aussi beaucoup de satisfaction parce que on voit là qu'on a eu un effet bénéfique.
Crown Prince Nicola II spent his childhood in France. It was only after the breakup of Yugoslavia that he took office as the pretender to the Montenegrin throne.
Je suis peut-être un peu naïf et peut-être un peu prétentieux, mais je pense que je peux jouer un rôle justement pour rappeler ce qui nous unit, pour rappeler à la fois à travers l'environnement, à travers le territoire, la mise en valeur du territoire, et à la fois cette histoire qui nous unit. Même si l'histoire a été conflictuelle, bien sûr que l'histoire a été conflictuelle.
When King Simeon II returned to his homeland after 50 years in exile, he resolved to go into politics.
Quand il y a eu le moment qu'il fallait servir le pays au bout de tant d'années d'exil, on ne se pose pas la question si c'est en tant que roi ou pas, c'était le servir. Et c'est comme ça que je suis arrivé à me présenter, qui était contre, si vous voulez, mes principes politiques du fait que le roi doit être supra partes et ne pas appartenir à des partis politiques et se mêler à la politique directe ou ce que vous voudrez.
Sofia, 14th of June 2017. In the Orthodox Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, the European aristocracy has gathered in honor of King Simeon II of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. In Bulgaria, the relationship between the Orthodox Church and the royal family has always been important. On this memorable day, this is very much in evidence. King Simeon II is turning 80 years old.
Des fois, je ne peux pas y croire. Et d'autres fois, je me dis, mon Dieu, enfin, c'est bon pour les chrysanthèmes, n'est-ce pas vraiment? Mais, bon, il faut essayer de nouveau de voir le côté positif. Il y a ce qu'on a vécu, il y a un bagage. Puis si on a la santé encore, je remercie le ciel pour ça. C'est déjà un joli record pour nos jours.
Simeon II is a king without a kingdom. The monarchy was abolished when the communists took power in Bulgaria in 1946. However, since the fall of the Iron Curtain, the king has once again become highly regarded. As a special birthday gift, His Majesty will be presented with a new stamp featuring his likeness. Through well-planned marriages, the Balkans ensure that the royal families of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha from Bulgaria, Petrović-Njegoš from Montenegro, as well as the House of Hohenzollern in Romania, are all closely connected by family ties. Although their countries are today republics, the royals continue to have an important role to play as state representatives and internally as moral institutions. Paris is Crown Prince Nicolas II's adopted home. He was born and raised in France in 1944, far from his second homeland in Montenegro. Later, he studied architecture in his country of birth, and at the age of 73, still works in his Parisian studio. His historical connection to Montenegro is ever present.
Hey, salut Kodo. Ça va? Ça va? Ouais, ça va bien toi.
Ça va.
Super, super. Bon.
Alors?
Ben écoute, on va peut-être s'installer là.
For many years, Nicolas II has divided his time between his occupation as an architect in France and his engagements in Montenegro. Despite his age, this routine looks set to continue for the foreseeable future.
C'est pas moi qui vais prendre la retraite, c'est la retraite qui va me prendre. Non, dans le sens où, bon, effectivement, le travail, bon, pour moi, c'est pas du travail. Il n'y a pas le travail et le plaisir ou le repos. Pour moi, la vie, c'est de faire quelque chose, c'est d'être actif. La difficulté pour moi, c'est la double vie. Évidemment, la vie est beaucoup moins chère au Monténégro qu'à Paris. Si je veux maintenir mon train de vie parisien, et j'y tiens parce que j'ai mes enfants et mes petits-enfants qui sont à Paris et à Lyon, qui n'est pas très loin de Paris, il faut que je travaille. Voilà.
At present, the Crown Prince flies once a month to Montenegro to fulfill his representational duties and to oversee the projects of his family foundation.
Pour moi, la présence, c'est forcément une présence active. Ce n'est pas une présence simplement pour jouer les potiches, quelques événements et inaugurations. Pour ça que j'ai souhaité que dans la loi sur le statut des héritiers de la dynastie soit inscrit la fondation, pour nous laisser la possibilité d'avoir une certaine autonomie d'action.
Montenegro lies on the Adriatic coast, south of Croatia and north of Albania. Flights from Paris take 2.5 hours. In the former capital of Cetinje, the great-grandfather of Crown Prince Nicolas II once laid the foundations for the kingdom still to come. His name was Nicolas I, who ruled the country from 1860, first as sovereign prince and after his coronation in 1910 as king. During the First World War, Nicolas I and his family fled to exile in France, where he died in 1921. He is succeeded by his grandson Mihailo I, who is appointed king by the government in exile. His son, Nicolas II, born in French exile in 1944, becomes crown prince. The Kingdom of Montenegro was founded in 1910 in an already fragile political environment. The Ottoman Empire represented a perpetual threat to the country and its neighboring Balkan states. In 1912, the king allies with Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, declares war on the Ottoman Empire, and quickly defeats the Ottoman troops.
Monténégro, effectivement, a joué un rôle important pendant les guerres balkaniques, puisque les principales batailles étaient tout autour de son territoire. Et je pense aussi que le roi Nicolas, ensuite, a joué son rôle efficace pour la reconquête sur l'Empire ottoman. Et c'est quelque chose qui lui a valu d'être reconnu comme un bon stratège aussi, un grand stratège aussi, qui a construit le Monténégro moderne.
military action came to an end by the conclusion of a peace treaty. However, a second Balkan War followed as early as 1913, and this became the spark for the First World War. As the war progresses, Austria-Hungary occupies the much smaller state of Montenegro. In 1916, King Nicola I flees into exile in Italy, together with his government. From there, he proclaims the union of his country with Serbia, forming the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. But he is unable to come to agreement with Serbia's King Alexander I on important political issues. The conflict escalates, resulting in the dethroning of Nicola I, who remains in exile. With this, the fate of the Kingdom of Montenegro is sealed. At the end of 1918 comes the proclamation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, and the Kingdom of Montenegro disappears from the political map. Montenegro regained its independence as a separate state only long after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 2006. Today, Crown Prince Nicola II is actively involved in various parts of the country. One of his most recent projects is in the medieval town of Herceg Novi on the Adriatic Sea coast. Over the centuries, the port town has been claimed in turn by the Turks, Italians, and Austrians. As a result, Herceg Novi features a mixture of different architectural styles. Many of the historic buildings are in desperate need of renovation. Alongside architects from France and Montenegro, Prince Nicola II is supporting the necessary reconstruction work. In 1979, an earthquake destroyed a fortress on the waterfront, and the majority of the complex toppled into the sea. Over time, the two remaining walls became completely overgrown with vegetation and also threatened to crumble and collapse. The Petrović Njegos Foundation is supporting a group of craftsmen and students as they restore the walls. The Crown Prince occasionally also lends a hand.
C'était pas très évident au départ, quand c'était envahi par la végétation et qu'on ne voyait, il n'y avait rien de formel, disons, et tout d'un coup, on voit les choses apparaître. Et je pense que c'est une des meilleures leçons aussi pour les jeunes de voir apparaître les choses du chaos, parce que c'était la ruine un peu chaotique, envahie par la végétation, etc. Et tout d'un coup, on arrive à l'architecture. Alors, c'est un petit projet, ce n'est qu'un début, comme on disait en 68, mais continuons le combat.
Today, the Romanian royal family is involved above all in charitable projects, while pulling diplomatic strings behind the scenes. Early summer 2017. At Peles Castle, around 2 hours' drive from the capital of Bucharest, preparations are underway for the 90th anniversary of the coronation of Romania's last king, Michael I. He ascended the throne at the tender age of 6. His daughter, Crown Princess Margareta, is hosting the celebrations. Her father is unable to attend the festivities due to a serious illness. In 2014, he retreated entirely from public life. After the death of his grandfather, Ferdinand I von Hohenzollern in 1927, Crown Prince Carol II, the father of Michael I, is the rightful heir to the throne. However, due to scandals and his relationship with a commoner, Carol II is forced to renounce in favor of his young son Michael. It is an abrupt end to Michael's childhood.
Mon père est un homme remarquable parce qu'il a beaucoup souffert. Et je crois que ça lui a donné une profondeur, une tendresse et une compréhension envers les autres qui sont hors du commun. Il était roi quand il avait 6 ans. Son père a chassé sa mère, il la voyait 2 fois par an. Il a été séparé de sa mère à peu près 10 ans, dans les années les plus sensibles de la croissance d'un enfant. Mais il n'est pas devenu ni amer, ni méchant, ni insupportable. Il a grandi trop vite, au fond. Mais je crois qu'il a une âme très ancienne.
I became king at the age of not quite 6 under Regency. Things were not going very well in Romania, so then the political parties decided that they should, after all, call back my father. And that is how in 1930, in June, he came back, and he became king then. So I became crown prince. My father, I think, had a rather jealous character, and besides the schooling, he never really did keep me posted to what actually was going on in the country from a political point of view. So when events of Europe caught us up in Romania and he finally had to leave, I was suddenly caught up in a certain situation which I had not actually been fully prepared for.
The situation was the beginning of the Second World War. Romania takes the side of Germany against the Soviet Union. The now 19-year-old King Mihail I officially reigns as monarch. However, government power is in the hands of the general and proclaimed leader, Ion Antonescu.
Luckily, Antonescu called my mother back, because in the meantime she had to leave Romania because of this person that my father brought back. And thank God for that, because I don't know what myself and the others would have done if she hadn't come there. And she was really the pillar in my life.
When his mother, Princess Elena, returns from Greece in 1940, she stands by her son and instructs him in state leadership. She becomes his closest confidant. The tensions between the young king and Antonescu grow ever stronger as the leader seeks to minimize the king's political influence. Mihail I sees the war as a grave danger to his country, and on the 23rd of August 1944 requests a meeting with Antonescu.
The main idea was to try our very best to get Antonescu to make this armistice and get us out of the war. He started getting rather angry, he raised his voice, and at one moment, Antonescu on his high horses suddenly turned around and said, "What, leave the country in the hands of a child?" That was his mentality.
King Mihail I has anticipated this reaction and on a pre-agreed signal instructs his guards to arrest Antonescu. The path is now clear for a change of sides by Romania, and Mihail I declares war on the German Reich, hoping for a quick peace agreement.
Bon, je pense que son rôle historique, le 23 août 1944, quand il a rangé la Roumanie qui était du côté des Allemands, du côté des Alliés. Et il a fait ça à l'âge de 19 ans, ou c'était 20 ans. Enfin, c'était quelque chose d'extraordinaire, parce qu'il a pu changer le destin d'un pays, d'un peuple, à cet âge-là, avec une force morale et un courage physique extraordinaire.
Crown Princess Margareta has invited a number of important figures from her country to commemorate the 90th throne anniversary of Mihail I. Since her father retired, she and Prince Consort Radu have been the official representatives of their royal house. Since 1943, the royal house in Bulgaria has been led by King Simeon II. Today, the town of Popovo, which is around 300 kilometers from Sofia in the northwest of the country, has a great honor. The king is visiting. A bust of his father, Boris III, is unveiled with military honors. Before the Second World War, Boris III had conducted major military maneuvers in the region and had also connected Popovo to the railway system, constructed new roads, and provided electricity to the entire city. Simeon II can still remember his father.
Quand il revenait du bureau le soir, c'est alors que nous le voyons à notre souper. Et bon, il avait toujours essayé de nous faire rire ou de montrer des dessins qu'il pouvait faire ou nous poser des questions sur nos cours ou nos leçons. Moi, je le sentais très jovial et cordial. N'est-ce pas? C'était pas l'image du père qui vous glaçait le sang dans les veines.
Boris III is King Ferdinand I of Bulgaria's eldest son. After the losses of the First World War, he abdicates in favor of his son. Initially, Boris III plays a subordinate political role in the country, which is torn by strife. He only takes decisive control in 1935 after an attempted coup d'etat, whereupon he establishes a new parliament and gives women the right to vote. His son, Simeon II, is born in 1937. After the outbreak of the Second World War, Boris III joins Germany in its war against Greece and Yugoslavia. But at a meeting, Boris III refuses to cooperate with Hitler on two major issues: the deportation of Bulgarian Jews and the declaration of war against the Soviet Union. Boris III dies shortly after his return from Germany, with the official cause of death given as sudden death from heart failure. Yet still today in Bulgaria, rumors persist that Boris III was poisoned on Hitler's orders. And thus, the barely 6-year-old Simeon II is proclaimed king.
À cet âge-là, d'abord, la mort est une notion qu'on n'a pas, n'est-ce pas? C'était simplement tout à coup un manque, et en même temps que ma mère était devenue l'autorité supérieure. On avait une éducation déjà très sévère. Il fallait tout faire parce que ceci, parce que cela, il fallait bien se tenir, parce que... bref. Et donc, tout d'un coup, ça a été encore plus. Parce qu'évidemment, maintenant, tu représentes ceci, tu as remplacé papa, n'est-ce pas, ce genre de... Et donc, j'essayais, comme tout petit, de faire de mon mieux ou d'obéir ce que les aides de camp disaient ou ce que maman nous demandait de faire, mais toujours dans l'optique d'un enfant. Parce que, voulez-vous, on a beau être ce qu'on est, mais on reste avec la mentalité d'un enfant.
Following the invasion of the Red Army in September 1944, events unfolded in rapid succession. A merciless purge sees the entire political leadership condemned to death and executed. However, the now 8-year-old King Simeon II and his family are spared. In 1946, they're forced into exile. First, they move to Alexandria in Egypt, to his mother's family. Her father, the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, from the House of Savoy, and her mother, Eleanor of Montenegro, are already living here in exile. Simeon II attends an English private school, while the family is financially supported by grandparents. During this time, the family lives in simple conditions before their journey continues.
On avait des difficultés économiques réelles parce qu'on avait eu $200 par tête, mais c'est ma grand-mère de Monténégro, Hélène, qui nous a aidés. Elle avait cette élégance, maman adorait tricoter, et elle nous faisait des pullovers ou je ne sais pas quoi. Et puis dans ce qu'on appelle la boule de laine, elle cachait un billet de 20 livres égyptienne et commençait à faire la boule. Alors maman, en finissant la laine, trouvait ça. C'était une façon de lui passer de l'argent discrètement au lieu de lui dire « Tiens, prends ça », parce que grand-maman savait qu'on n'avait pas d'un sou.
In 1951, the family moves from Egypt to Spain, where the government has granted them asylum. Simeon II attends the French school in Madrid, where he will later go on to study. King Juan Carlos becomes a close friend. In 1962, Simeon II marries Margarita Gómez Acebo y Cejuela, a member of the Spanish nobility. The couple go on to have 5 children together. In Romania, Crown Princess Margareta has invited visitors to the palace garden today in her role as the president of the Romanian Red Cross. Her interest in helping those in need was awakened during her studies in sociology, political science, and public law in England. She also works for the World Health Organization and the United Nations. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, she moved to Romania and supported her father whilst he regained his footing after being exiled.
On a une relation père-fille, mais je crois que j'ai aussi, ayant été très proche de ma grand-mère, donc sa mère, et il a vu elle en moi. Et donc on a développé un autre rapport aussi, où j'avais aussi une relation professionnelle avec lui. Évidemment, lui, il me guidait, mais moi, je l'ai aussi conseillé parfois. Il me demandait des conseils.
After the Second World War, the communists occupy all the important government posts. On the path to becoming a people's republic, they are obstructed by the constitutionally enshrined parliamentary monarchy, and so attempt to incite antipathy towards King Mikhail I. But he is extremely popular among his people.
In a small plane, piloted by himself from the continent, King Michael of Romania arrived with his mother, Queen Helen, at London Airport. Like other royal personages from abroad, they're visiting Britain in order to attend Princess Elizabeth's wedding. King Michael, who's 25, is now the only sovereign still reigning in the troubled sphere of the Balkans. The king and his mother, who are staying at Claridge's, dined at Buckingham Palace.
Mikhail I is one of Queen Elizabeth II's 3rd cousins. During her wedding, he is strongly advised not to return to Romania.
Following the king and queen in the procession were Queen Mary, Princess Andrew of Greece, the bridegroom's mother, and King Haakon of Norway. Then King Michael of Romania, the Queen of the Hellenes, and the boy king of Iraq.
But Mikhail I ignores these warnings and returns to his homeland. He does not want to abandon the Romanians in these difficult times. The decision does not please the communist rulers, and Mikhail I is forced to abdicate at gunpoint. He and his mother are removed from the country on the royal train.
C'est le train qui l'a emmené en exil, donc ce qu'ils ont vécu cette nuit-là, lui et la reine-mère, on n'a pas vraiment envie de se rappeler de ça. Ils ne savaient pas où il allait. On leur a dit que le voyage est vers l'Autriche et la Suisse, mais on ne savait pas. Ils ne savaient pas si c'est vrai.
Fermé tous les
Ils
volets.
ont été obligés de voyager avec les volets fermés et enfin, ils se pouvaient très bien se retrouver à Moscou le jour après. Donc, c'était vraiment la terreur.
The train stops on a bridge. We knew it was a bridge because the water was running out. We had the blinds pulled. So my mother just looked at me. You know, we're still in the Russian zone. You know, sort of an inquirer look at me and says, now what, you know? We couldn't be quite sure what was going to happen. We stayed there about 10 minutes, and then the train moved on and stopped again. And then I heard a jeep coming up, because I happened to know the sound of the jeep. It came up, brakes creased in front of our wagon. The door was flung open, and in walks a young American officer, a lieutenant. That was a really sort of gripping moment, because he looked at me and saluted and said, "Now you're free."
In 1948, Michael I marries Anne of Bourbon-Parma in Greece. They move to Switzerland, where the king earns a living in the aviation industry. The couple have 5 daughters. The royal train that carried King Michael I into exile is still in service today. The wagons are in the same condition as when they were first delivered in 1928. Today, they are used by Princess Margareta for ceremonies and to receive important guests. Seeing the royal train with their own eyes is a significant occasion for many Romanians.
Moi, je ressens plutôt les gens. Quand on passe, on s'arrête dans les gares, là, ça m'a profondément impressionné. Comme des milliers de gens sont là. C'est un moment de joie.
There is no royal train in the small country of Montenegro. Crown Prince Nicola II travels to his appointments by motorbike or car. Today, he is visiting donkey breeder Darko Sarvelejec to talk about his latest project, Oasis. The prince wants to help farmers to construct holiday homes, as well as to produce energy from solar power and biomass, and in this way, help them to become financially independent.
C'est très difficile pour un homme seul avec sa famille de tout porter sur ses épaules, et c'est pour ça que l'idée de l'Oasis, c'est que les gens s'entraident, les gens sont ensemble, etc. Et je pense surtout que l'intérêt de l'Oasis, c'est de connecter avec une certaine forme de tourisme familial.
It was as a tourist in 1967, at the age of 23, that Crown Prince Nicola II came to Montenegro for the first time ever.
À l'époque, je passais beaucoup de vacances en stop. J'allais en Grèce en stop, et là, je revenais de faire la Norvège en stop. Et en revenant, j'étais au bout du rouleau, j'avais plus un sou. Voilà, j'avais mangé des quignons de pain pendant les 15 derniers jours. Et j'appelle mon parrain qui était là. Et je lui dis, invite-moi à dîner parce que j'en peux plus. Et il me dit, mais t'as jamais eu envie d'aller au Monténégro? Je dis, si, j'aimerais bien y aller, etc. Mais je te propose, je te paye ton voyage au Monténégro. Et je suis parti donc au Monténégro, donc en train jusqu'à Rijeka. Et puis ensuite, en stop, je suis descendu jusqu'à la côte monténégrine.
Today, he will head off on his motorbike in a search for traces of his earlier journey, which begins at the 30-kilometer-long Bay of Kotor on the Montenegrin Adriatic coast.
La première émotion, c'est le paysage. Voilà. Alors un paysage maintenant qui m'est très familier. Et comme tout ce qui est familier, quand on le retrouve après un moment, ça fait du bien. On sent qu'il y a un air qui est différent. On a l'impression qu'on se fatigue moins, on est plus léger, voilà. Et j'ai l'impression à chaque fois de me ressourcer un peu quand je reviens ici.
Back in 1967, he walked for 9 hours from the port city of Kotor to the summit of Mount Lovchen, which has an altitude of 1,700 meters. This is also the site of a mausoleum of an eminent ancestor, Prince Bishop Petar II, a poet and head of state, who hailed from the Petrovich-Nijegoš dynasty. He died in 1851, aged only 37.
C'est un personnage qui dépasse la simple histoire d'un homme et l'œuvre d'un homme. Il a éclairé le sens de la destinée humaine. Et dans cette dynamique, toujours dans cette énergie du combat du bien et du mal, qui a été l'histoire du Monténégro pendant des siècles.
At the mausoleum, the young crown prince encounters a French-speaking married couple from Belgrade. He introduces himself as Prince Nicolas II. Upon hearing this, they invite him to drive to Cetinje, and together they visit the palace of his great-grandfather Nicolas I.
Je sors ma carte d'étudiant pour payer le billet d'entrée, bien sûr. Et lui, tout de suite, dit « C'est pas possible, vous n'allez pas le faire payer pour rentrer chez lui. »
King Nicolas I resided in the palace, which is now a museum, first as prince from 1910, then as king in the Kingdom of Montenegro that he had created. Until his overthrow after the end of the First World War, Nicolas I lived with his wife Milena, his 3 sons and 9 daughters in the salons and bedrooms of the palace, which are still preserved today as they were in his lifetime.
En 1967, quand je suis sorti de ce palais, après avoir fait la visite et avoir bu une petite lausa dans le bureau du directeur, il y avait une centaine de personnes qui étaient sur la place, devant, et qui attendaient ma sortie, et qui étaient un peu en retrait. Voilà, moi je me demandais c'est quoi cet attroupement. Et tout d'un coup, une dame est sortie du rang, une dame âgée, très comme ça, bien habillée, en noir un peu, comme beaucoup à l'époque, des femmes s'habillaient souvent en noir au Monténégro. Et elle s'approche de moi et dans un français impeccable, elle me dit « Monseigneur, nous sommes très honorés de votre visite ». Alors, c'est la première fois de ma vie qu'on m'appelait Monseigneur. Et j'avais pas le look d'un Monseigneur. Hein. Je venais de faire passer 15 jours en stop sur la côte d'Almat. J'étais pas rasé, voilà, des cheveux longs et tout.
Thank you so much.
So nice trip in Montenegro and hello to the Vietnam.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Donc là, ça a été la première fois que j'ai eu conscience que j'étais un Monseigneur.
In 1989, Nicolas II, together with his family, appears publicly as Crown Prince of Montenegro for the first time. Around this time, and to his great astonishment, the socialist government of Yugoslavia asks the prince to accompany the transfer of the bones of his great-grandfather, King Nicolas I, from Italy to Montenegro. The grandfather died in exile in France in 1921 and was buried in a Russian Orthodox church in San Remo, Italy. The remains of his wife and 2 of his daughters are also transported with his bones. Aboard a frigate, the journey begins at the port of San Remo and makes its way to the coast of Montenegro. From there, the caskets are transported to the former capital of Cetinje.
Quand je suis arrivé ici, j'étais absolument complètement surpris. Je m'attendais à tout sauf à ça. Je m'attendais à une cérémonie officielle avec tous des gens en costume, etc. Mais là, c'était toute une population. Je ne sais pas, vous imaginez, vous avez été à Cetinje, c'est une ville qui fait sur toute la commune 20 000 habitants, mais dans la ville, c'est 10 000 habitants. Il y avait 200 000 personnes.
The ceremony is held after the Orthodox rites. The caskets are blessed by the patriarch.
Les gens étaient dans les arbres, sur le toit des maisons, au passage des cortèges. Toute la nuit, ils allaient mettre des bougies sur les cercueils. Enfin, c'était quelque chose de très émouvant. À partir de ça, bon, ma vie a changé de trajectoire. Je me suis mis sur une autre orbite, si on peut parler d'une façon astrologique.
At the time, Nicola II did not speak Serbo-Croatian and would write down the phonetic pronunciation of words.
Hvala vam, dragi moji zemljačci. Hvala mojoj zemci, Crnogoroj I Jugoslaviji.
At the same time, Gorbachev is pushing ahead with the opening of the Eastern Bloc to the west. He tries to persuade Romanian leader Ceausescu to make reforms. But the dictator fails to recognize which way the wind is blowing. In Romania, there are mass demonstrations against Ceausescu's regime. Ultimately, the army takes the side of the people. At the last moment, Ceausescu and his wife Helena attempt to flee by helicopter, but are captured and later executed. In the former countries of the Eastern Bloc, remaining reminders of communism are pulled down. The path to return to Romania appears to be clear for King Michael I. He longs to see his homeland again. In 1992, the time finally arrives. After over 44 years in exile, some million Romanians warmly receive him. Decades of Ceausescu's dictatorship have left their mark on the people, and they long for a positive figurehead. The Orthodox Church receives King Michael I as if he were a long-lost son. The rapturous welcome from the Romanians alarms the incumbent government, which attempts to delay a further visit from King Michael I.
Il a souffert pour son pays quand même durant ces années de communisme. Il m'a parlé de cette souffrance du pays qu'il ne pouvait pas supporter parce qu'il ne pouvait rien faire. Il était impuissant. Tout ce qu'il pouvait faire durant ces années d'exil, c'était de faire un message envers le peuple. Chaque nouvelle année à Noël. Mais c'était aussi un problème de rencontrer les Roumains parce que c'était infiltré. Et donc c'était très difficile parce que d'abord il y avait parfois des menaces et parfois des gens laissaient des bouteilles de vin ou du miel ou quelque chose sur la porte. Comme ça ils disparaissaient parce qu'ils n'osaient pas venir. C'était très touchant.
After decades in exile, King Simeon II is also keen to visit his home country of Bulgaria. But he doesn't want to act too fast. From Spain, he observes developments unfolding in his homeland. It's only in 1996, 7 years after the fall of the wall, that he decides to return. He could never have expected the overwhelming reception that awaits him. As in Romania, here too, there is a deep yearning for the former monarch.
C'était une telle joie, une telle émotion, et surprise naturellement, aussi, tout à la fois, quand on dit qu'on croit rêver, mais c'est un peu ça, parce que si vous passez toute votre vie comme un proscrit, et tout à coup vous vous retrouvez chez vous, c'est difficile à assimiler.
After this first trip, King Simeon II decided to actively enter politics, and in 2001 changed his name to the Slavic Simeon Saksko-Burgotski.
Dragi съотечественици, днес декларирам целта си да основа и поведа едно обществено движение за нов морал в политиката, за нови икономически решения, с нови за България идеи и с нови хора като движеща сила.
His party, National Movement Simeon II, is elected by an overwhelming majority, and he is sworn in as the first European monarch to become Prime Minister. During his time in office, he meets with important figures, including Jacques Chirac, Tony Blair, and Prince Charles, to discuss potential EU membership. In 2005, he signs the Treaty of Accession in Luxembourg, but this is insufficiently ambitious for some Bulgarians, and he's voted out.
Les attentes étaient mais infiniment au-dessus de tout ce qui était réalisable ou même logique. Et j'ai eu des cas, en me déplaçant en province, des gens qui me saisissaient, ils me disaient dites donc, vous avez promis ceci et cela. Ah, quand? Ah, vous l'avez promis, mais où? Avez-vous lu? L'avez-vous vu à la télévision? Non, mais on s'attendait à ça. Ah bon, ça c'est une toute autre question. Est-ce que vous vous attendiez à ce que moi j'aurais dit?
In Montenegro in the early 1990s, Crown Prince Nicola II adopts a role as a mediator between cultures.
J'ai eu l'idée de proposer au Monténégro de faire une biennale d'art contemporain. Et en 91, 15 jours après l'ouverture de la première biennale, la guerre éclate en Slovénie. Et donc on a, pendant toute la période de la guerre, jusqu'en 2002, fait des biennales contre vents et marées, malgré l'embargo, malgré toutes les difficultés, et qui était un message justement d'ouverture, de communiquer ensemble et d'essayer de résister à l'absurdité de ce conflit.
But then the aspiration for independence of many republics of the former Yugoslavia develop into a full-blown conflagration. The war in the Balkans breaks out, the first major conflict on the European continent since the Second World War. Montenegro is not directly involved.
Je me trouvais confronté à cette situation de guerre, et évidemment en disant, avec le danger que le nom Petrović-Njegoš, qui avait été symbole de l'héroïsme monténégrin, de la lutte contre à la fois les Autrichiens, les Turcs, les Napoléons et autres, enfin de cette résistance pour la liberté, que ce nom-là soit utilisé comme emblème pour aller au combat. Et donc j'ai tout de suite manifesté ma solidarité avec toutes les associations pacifistes.
At the turn of the millennium, Montenegro experiences a wave of protests. Some of the population wants to regain independence, others want to remain a part of Serbia. As a first step, the choice is made to create a loose association of two independent states. After 3 years, Montenegro wants to withdraw from the federation. In 2006, the Montenegrin government calls for a referendum on independence. 55.5% vote in favor.
Une fois que l'indépendance a été acquise, je me suis dit, maintenant que le Monténégro est indépendant, la question du statut de la famille se pose. Parce que nous avons été bannis du Monténégro sous prétexte que le roi Nicolas était un traître, était vendu aux Autrichiens, etc. Et donc ça a été la raison. Donc il était nécessaire de faire cette réhabilitation morale et historique.
5 years later, the Parliament of Montenegro passes a law that regulates the status of the Petrović-Njegoš dynasty. It is morally rehabilitated, and the establishment of a state-funded family foundation is enshrined in law. From this point onwards, they are able to reside in a palace and are granted a budget of 4.3 million euros for the first 6 years. Crown Prince Nicola II is also authorized to act as the official representative of the government. In Montenegro, the foundation is involved in ecology, culture and solidarity, and is co-sponsor of the annual Gaia Prize, which is awarded to organizations and individuals who have committed themselves to the protection of the Mediterranean.
Winner of the award, Montenegro.
In December 2017, King Mikhail I of Romania dies after a long illness. The state mourning lasts a full week. For Romanians, it's important to remember the former monarch's role in saving the country during the Second World War. In their farewells, King Simeon II of Bulgaria accompanies his cousin, Crown Princess Margareta, and her husband, Prince Radu. King Mikhail's body is carried through the country on the royal train to allow all Romanians to bid farewell to their king. But what does the future hold for the royal houses in the Balkans?
C'est évidemment un sujet qui nous préoccupe et dont on s'occupe activement. Mais de toute façon, il y a une ligne de succession claire.
La plupart de mes concitoyens sont heureux ou persuadés que la République est la solution. Eh bien, c'est comme ça.
Je sais que la présence de notre famille est importante au Monténégro, qu'elle sert un peu de fil conducteur, un petit peu de lien, et que, bon, bah, si c'est nécessaire un jour, pourquoi pas, mon fils, mon petit-fils, peut-être qu'un jour, ça peut arriver pour que le Monténégro soit plus uni.